Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, and I don't think it puts too fine a point on it, does Thailand have the most complicated entry restrictions on earth? And the reason for saying that or asking that question is due to an article in the Telegraph, that's telegraph.co.uk, and the title is Thailand, the country with the most complicated entry restrictions on earth. Holidays are back on, but they aren't straightforward. And quoting directly, Thailand has finally been removed from the red list in a cull that saw the number of countries under the harshest travel restrictions slashed from 54 to just 7. And for those who are unaware, especially American viewers, the red list is this list of restricted countries that, or I should say countries that require an inbound quarantine when going back to the United Kingdom when departing from one of these countries. Thailand was included on that list up until rather recently. UK folks, UK passport holders, British people going back to the United Kingdom had to quarantine after returning from Thailand. So it was a real, I don't know how you'd put it, it was definitely dissuading many people from taking a trip to Thailand because they didn't want to have to deal with any quarantine requirements on the way back in. But that seems to have been scrapped. Quoting further, the news is particularly significant as it means it is now possible to have a holiday in Southeast Asia for essentially the first time since the start of the pandemic. Well, that's not entirely correct. This is me commenting here. We were talking about, British folks could get into Thailand going back about a year ago. This whole red list thing, to the best of my knowledge, didn't come online until a couple of months ago. Quoting further, however, while holidays to Thailand are now feasible, they are far from straightforward. Tourists must travel directly to a small number of, quote, sandbox destinations, generally islands, staying there for 7 days before being able to travel elsewhere in the country. Still, an enforced beach holiday is hardly the worst proposition, and for those desperate to return to buzzing Bangkok or sleepy northern temple towns, the deal may seem more than worth it. Yeah, look, we've talked about this. I mean, the sandboxes, for what they were kind of a godsend in a real way. And something that Thailand hasn't really been given a lot of credit for. I know folks have noted that I'm a bit critical, for lack of a better term, but something that really has not been made enough of, in my opinion, is the fact that, look, of all the places in Southeast Asia, Thailand went out of its way to welcome and accommodate tourists more than any other country that I can think of in this region. Thailand essentially, obviously they had the main shutdowns and things were very tightly shut down for quite a while. And then non-immigrant visa holders could get back in after ties and permanent residents and things. And then, but, this past year, basically since 2021, it's been possible, unless my memory's failing me, but I think it's been possible to use some form of sandbox for or get into Thailand at least. Yes, there was a quarantine, but even still, it was possible to get in here. There's other countries that just said, nope, not letting anybody in. Vietnam comes to mind. Meanwhile, starting in, I believe, March is when the Phuket sandbox started, if my memory serves me. I mean, Thailand has gone out of its way to continue to try and accommodate tourists. Now, it makes sense. A major chunk of GDP, comes from tourism, as we've talked about in other videos. But long story short, in this video, is the thing to take on board is, now it does have some complex entry requirements. There's no doubt about that. Are they the most complicated on earth? Well, that depends on your definition. It's possible to get into Thailand. There are countries that simply say, no, can't get in. I mean, if you consider that to be a pretty simple entry procedure with just no being the answer, then I guess they have simpler procedures. But yes, it is possible to get into Thailand. As I've discussed at length in other videos on this channel, do I think that perhaps it could be less Byzantine? Do I think that it could be less document intensive? Do I frankly think that the whole thing could definitely be streamlined far, far more than it already is? Is there, in my opinion, a strong, reasonable argument that certificates of entry could go away, especially for those who are vaccinated? I don't really see the purpose of that process. I think there's a lot that can be done with the current system. But do I think it's the worst in the world? well, define worst. I would say that you can still get into Thailand. That's a big one. There's places you can't get into. Then on top of that, yeah, it is somewhat complex. I've done videos, especially on certificates of entry. We're doing one contemporaneously with this one. And I've got serious issues with the COE process right now. But honestly, I don't think that I don't think that's something that's going to be particularly permanent, especially the more egregious parts of that overall process. I think we're going to see that kind of get cut out. And people forget, we had the fit to fly documentation going back earlier in this year, and that went away. They cut that out because, one, it was redundant, and frankly, it was causing a lot of consternation, and it was not a great way to deal with things. You know, maybe we'll see the same thing with COE or some major aspects of COE in the days and weeks moving ahead. Is it the most difficult place in the world to get into? I would say that that's not necessarily the case. There's certainly harder places to come into. Is it a process that can be a bit frustrating? And beyond a bit, I'd say, is it a process that can be frustrating? Yeah, no question. It is a frustrating process. We get frustrated here dealing with it on behalf of our clients. That stated, those who feel like they may need some assistance, it may not be a terrible idea to contact a legal professional, gain some insight and guidance into how best to proceed.